Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to continue hearing evidence from Dr Sarah Colwell of the BRE. So I'm going to ask Dr Colwell to come back in at this point. Thank you. Good morning, Dr Colwell.
Good morning.
Last lap. Are you ready to continue?
I am ready to continue.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you. Yes, good morning, Dr Colwell. Now, one of the points we were discussing yesterday, not long before we broke off, was about the FAQ, and you told us that by August, September 2014, you and others at the BRE had decided not to go down the FAQ route, not to propose that to government, and instead wait for the revised version of ADB, yes?
Yes.
Now, in that period, so thinking back to August, September 2014, when did you understand any revised version of the approved document would likely to be finalised at that point?
I don't recall that in detail as to what that timeline, that process would be. No.
Right. You said it was Dr Smith informing you about this revision to ADB. Did she give you any time frame within which this review of ADB would start or finish?
No, it was a general discussion in the industry around that time that this was imminently on it in its way, that was the sort of the understanding that people were coming to, that there was a revision due.
Right. One of the reasons I ask is, were you aware at this point that ADB had indeed been revised and a new edition was in force from the 6th of April 2013? So there'd been quite a recent version of ADB. Were you aware of that?
Yes, that there had been amendments that had been made at that time.
So how could you think that a further edition might not be too far away?
My understanding was that there was more work to be done that was being let to discuss that. Right,
I see. And help us with this. Why does any further version of ADB preclude an FAQ going out, certainly on the big questions, the big points that were being raised by industry? Why were the two, why were they inconsistent with one another? They weren't, were they?
I'd never been involved in an FAQ previously, so my understanding of how they worked was not that clear, beyond understanding that it was a sort of a reference single point rather than a major piece of reinterpretation.
Right. So you didn't understand that the FAQ section of the department's website could be used to flag important matters immediately or at least quickly, given that reviews of the statutory guidance do tend to take some time? No,
I didn't understand or had no appreciation that was the type of approach.
Right, I see. Now, let's go back to what was happening with you in the CWCT now. If we go to BRE 3016101, this is quite a long email chain. We don't need to go through all of it. It begins on the 7th of July 2014, so just a few days, just 5 days after that CWCT meeting we were looking at. All of this was forwarded to you. We can see that at the top of the chain. But just so you have the context, if we look at the second email down at the bottom of page 3, so what we can see is that on the 7th of July, sorry, we can't quite see that, yeah. Second email down on page 3, that's an email from, yes, so Stuart Taylor of Wintec is writing to David Metcalfe of the CWCT, querying advice which had been given to Carrera Facades by Alan Keeler of the CWCT about the use of their Class B Acantha panels over 18 metres. And we can see from Stuart Taylor's email that Wintec have taken the view that, as Wintec did early on, following Stuart Taylor's call with you, that the guidance in paragraph 12.7 of approved document B extended to external cladding panels generally and not just to insulation. So that's the context to this. And if we go up to the next email on page 3, where we can see there David Metcalfe's response to Stuart Taylor, I just want to read from the second paragraph, where he says there, based on what is currently written in ADB, it would appear that the Carrera rain screen panels comply for use over 18 metres. The panels achieve B, S1, D0 in accordance with EN 13501 and are class naught, and therefore would meet the requirements for external surfaces given in clause 12, diagram 40. And then he goes on in the next paragraph, clause 12.7 makes no reference to cladding panels, etc. And the current view is that this does not apply to such materials. Where it gets confusing is that the discussions we had last week went a lot further and suggested that the materials referred to in clause 12.7 include panels and membranes, etc. We still do not know if this is the intention of that clause. If it is very poorly written and misleading and needs clarifying ASAP. And then in the final paragraph, he says, I hope this is of some use. I'm very sorry that I cannot give you a definitive answer. The more we look into the fire regulations, the messier it becomes. What is clear is that further guidance is needed, and I hope CWCT will be able to provide this soon. Now, David Metcalfe, Alan Keeler and Stuart Taylor had all attended the CWCT fire group meeting. We know that. Now, did it become clear to you when you received this chain of emails that not only was approved document B unclear to some, but also it was still not being accepted by people that clause 12.7 applied to cladding panels? Did you realise that?
At the time, I wasn't making the connection that they were not taking on board what had been discussed.
Right, yes. Because it also appears clear from this email that the CWCT were continuing to advise industry that for buildings over 18 metres, as long as the external cladding panels achieved a B or a national class naught, that complied, yes?
Without reading that again, then that would appear to be yes.
Yes. And my question is, did that not make the need for clarification a matter of some urgency, given that that appeared to be the advice that a body like the CWCT was carrying on giving to industry?
Given the review with hindsight where we are now, yes, absolutely.
Yes. Now, going a bit further up on this chain, to the bottom of page 2, we can see that Stuart Taylor forwards this email to you. Perhaps we could blow that up. It is very tiny. So on the 7th of July, Stuart Taylor forwards the email to you, and he writes, there still appears to be great confusion regarding ADB clause 12.7. In the recent fire group meeting, we briefly discussed the scope of clause 12.7, in particular whether it includes all components within the facade construction, i.e. not just insulation products. It has been Wintec's understanding for many years that all elements of the facade construction, including rain screen panels, etc., should comply with 12.7 when the building has a storey in excess of 18 metres above ground level. Following the fire group meeting, you stated that you would speak with Brian Martin regarding this topic with the intention of producing further clarification within the F&Q section of the ADB portal. In the meantime, I'd be grateful if you would review the short email trail below and provide your interpretation regarding this matter. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Now, do you remember ever replying to that email? There's no record of any reply to that where you'd reviewed the emails below and given your opinion. Do you remember doing that?
No, I don't.
The next email up in the chain, if we look at that, is on the 6th of August, so a month later, is again from Stuart Taylor, who writes to David Metcalfe, and he says this, I've just spoken with Sarah. She has proposed that CWCT, Wintec and BRE meet to discuss this issue further with the intention of formulating the wording for the proposed F&Q section within the ADB portal. It is proposed that this wording is then presented to Brian Martin for his sign-off. Sarah is currently away until September, and it is suggested that we meet around the 8th or 9th of September A venue for the meeting is not yet set. However, we can meet at BRE or CWCT. Sarah also proposes that we can discuss any other questions, queries regarding ADB at this meeting. Do you see that?
Yes.
So do you remember having a call with Stuart Taylor on the 6th of August at which you proposed a meeting between the CWCT, Wintec and the BRE?
I don't recall the call, but if, as Stuart's recorded an email to that, then I would.
Right. And do you remember offering to discuss at the meeting, as Stuart Taylor says in this last section of his email, any other questions or queries regarding ADB?
No, it would be related to, well, my recollection of anything around that time would have been with regard to the further developments relating from that CWCT meeting.
Right. So you don't think you offered to talk about any other questions regarding ADB? He's mistaken about that, is he?
I believe so.
Right. Now, the rest of this email chain is taken up with arranging the meeting that Stuart Taylor said that you proposed. And we look at the top of page 2. You said you'd be happy to meet on the 8th of September. We can see that.
Yes.
Does the 8th still work at the BRE? And then going up to page 1, to the very top of the chain, you would forward the entire chain to Stephen Howard on the 2nd of September. Yes?
Yes.
And just to note, none of this is dealt with in your witness statement, is it? We didn't get any of that in your statement.
I didn't forward that email, no.
Right. Let's go to the witness statement of Alan Keeler now at CWCT 40119 at page 7 and in paragraphs 25 and 26. He says, I attended a meeting with Stuart Taylor and Sarah Colwell at BRE on the 8th of September 2014. There was also another member of staff from BRE present, but I cannot recall his name. I cannot recall any details of the meeting. My recollection is that it confirmed the need for DCLG to provide confirmation of the intent of clause 12.7, and it was agreed that this would be done by means of an FAQ. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
Do you remember this meeting? Do you remember attending it?
I remember a meeting taking place, yes.
And can you help us who at the BRE attended? Because he believes that somebody else from the BRE, as well as yourself, was present.
I would, having forwarded the email to Stephen Howard, I would imagine it would have been Stephen.
Right. And do you remember that that at that meeting it confirmed the need for DCLG to provide confirmation of the intent of clause 12.7?
It was to build on the discussions of how that route could be taken forward, yes. Yes.
Now, if we go to briefly to Stuart Taylor's notes of this meeting, they're at WIN 701 at page 40. We can see that there, in the top part of the page, he's recorded that it was indeed Stephen Howard as well as yourself attending from the BRE, but also he's got Tony Baker there. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does that sound right to you that Tony Baker attended this meeting?
Entirely possible, yes.
And then towards the bottom of that page, third paragraph up from the end, we can see it says, BRE to prepare words for ADB portal, 12.7 clarification, expand that a tested installation cannot be used in a different system and be approved. Do you see those words?
I do, yes.
And do you remember discussing that at the meeting?
I don't recall that, no.
Does it sound right to you that at this meeting the BRE agreed to prepare words for the ADB portal, including 12.7 clarification?
I can't recall the contents of the meeting in detail. If that is how the findings from that were reported, then that would be their notes from that conversation, yes.
Right, and you don't disagree with those notes?
I don't disagree because I have no recollection or evidence to say otherwise.
Right. So we know this meeting took place on the 8th of September. How does this fit with what you told us yesterday? Yesterday you said that by August or September, the BRE had decided that the FAQ route wasn't one they were going to pursue. So had you already decided that when you met the CWCT and Wintec at this point? Or was that decision taken after this meeting?
As I said yesterday, we were becoming aware that it was more than a single point response that the document needed, and looking at where the changes were going to be required, it was going to be a larger piece of work around that. The decision was taken around that time of August, September, to look at whether that was better to move to a full review of Part 12. And part of the outcome of the meeting from this was clear that there was more required than just a simple FAQ question with a written answer. It was a more detailed response that was needed.
Yes, but can you help me with my question, which is, had the BRE decided that the FAQ route wasn't one they were going to pursue before or after this meeting?
I think this fed into that the outcome of this meeting fed into those sets of discussions.
Right. So are you saying you were already questioning within the BRE whether this was an appropriate route?
We were debating that at this time, yes.
Right. But a final decision within the BRE was taken after this meeting? Is that your evidence?
That's my recollection, yes.
Right. And shortly after this meeting?
I think it came as a result when looking at trying to work again with what was being requested, that this was a route that was not proving to be, in our view, addressing the wider need.
Right. And were you candid with the CWCT and WinTech at this meeting by revealing to them that the BRE had some concerns about this FAQ route?
I believe we were, but I don't think we were I don't believe we were as explicit as to say we don't believe this is the route to take. I think we were still looking at it as an option as part of that meeting. And that, as I said yesterday, I think that is my biggest, on reflection, that we perhaps didn't discuss it as openly in that context as we could or should have done. Right.
And you talked about a wider need which needed addressing. What wider need were you thinking needed to be addressed?
Going back to the original aims and objectives of the CWCT meeting earlier in July.
Right, I see.
I mean, would it be fair to say, it looks from this note as though at least you left Stuart Taylor with the impression that you were going to go away and draft something?
Yes, I would agree that we left him with that opinion.
Yeah.
Yes. Now let's move on. On the 7th of October 2014, is it right that you attended a CWCT members conference?
I believe I did in October, yes.
Yes, we believe that you gave a presentation at that conference. It was at the Science Museum. Do you remember that?
I've been advised that I was present. I don't remember the event itself, no.
Right. If we go to MET 3080679, this is the CWCT AGM and members meeting, and there's a list of members. You're present in this list of members. Do you see speakers, in fact, at the top?
Yes.
Second name down, Sarah Colwell, BRE. So it looks that you actually spoke at this conference. Do you remember that?
I believe so, yes, I do.
Do you remember what you spoke about?
If it would have been large-scale testing.
Right. And do you remember attending the whole of the conference or just your presentation?
I believe I only attended my presentation.
Right. Because if we look at Alan Keeler's presentation, this is here we go, CWCT 5026 at page 13. These are some slides that Alan Keeler gave on behalf of the CWCT at that point. And you can see the final bullet point reads, CWCT and BRE are in process of obtaining clarification through FAQ section of Building Regulations website. Yes?
Yes.
Now, when you attended this conference, did you tell Mr. Keeler that by this point the BRE had decided that wasn't an option they were pursuing?
No, I hadn't.
So we can see that Mr. Keeler is informing all the members and the attendees of this conference that that's happening.
Yes.
Did you know that he was telling people at the conference that this was what was occurring?
I don't recall being present for his presentation, so...
Right. And why didn't you tell him at that point, listen, we've discussed it, it's a more complex piece of work, we're not gonna pursue this FAQ route? Why didn't you tell him that?
With reflection, I don't know. I think partly I wasn't actively on the day-to-day working in that area any longer, so it tended to come back in as as something that I was picking up, and that's why I say with reflection I should have closed it out far more effectively than I did.
Did anyone tell you not to tell the CWCT?
No, I was never instructed. It was merely my lack of closure.
Right. Let's go to another email chain, CWCT 5040. There's an email chain here between you and David Metcalfe. And we look in the first email at the chain at the very bottom of page 1. It's dated the 13th of March, 2015 now. So we've jumped forward. That was October 14. Now we're in March 2015. And he writes, so it's right at the bottom of that page. So we need to go on to the top of page 2 to see the email. He says, Dear Sarah, around September last year, Alan Keeler met with you and a couple of your colleagues to discuss some points that arose from our meeting in July, in particular the issue around the use of combustible materials in the facade and the wording of clause 12.7 of ADB. It was my understanding that you agreed to draft a note clarifying the intent of the clause, which was to be sent to us for discussion. Has any progress been made on this? And then he says, I have a CWCT board and technical committee meeting on the 25th of March where I have to report on our activities, so I would be grateful for a quick response. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And if we go up to the next email in the chain on page 1, we can see a brief response from you on the same day, on the 13th of March. And you say, it's right at the bottom of that page, do you see that? Mm-hmm. You say, hi, David. Yes, a note has been drafted and revisited. It is still draft. Hopefully it will be closed out soon. Kind regards, Sarah.
Yes.
Now, was that true? Was there a draft in existence that had been drafted and revisited and that you thought would be closed out soon?
The headline drafts that I discussed after that meeting in July existed as headline notes. And I hoped that they would move forward in some form so that there was something that the CWCT could discuss, yes.
But how is that consistent with what you've told us, that by August, September 2014, it had been decided within the BRE that that was not a route you were going to go down and you were going to wait instead for the revisions to approve document B?
So I had made notes and comments about the points that were being discussed in that requirement, and I had hoped that we would circulate that as something that could form wider discussion for anything that went forward with the ADB.
I see. Had you discussed that with your colleagues in the BRE, or was this just a private hope?
It was more of a private hope. I hadn't taken it forward beyond that. It was just my set of notes around the points that had been raised, what I thought might be areas that could be picked up and discussed.
Right.
But it wasn't a drafted piece of text that could be used as an FAQ or an ADB.
Right. So help us with this. Were you thinking at this point that you would be drafting an FAQ and putting that forward to the department for its consideration?
I was not thinking we would be drafting an FAQ, no. I thought I was drafting up some text that could be used to assist in the redrafting of the ADB.
Right. Well, why not tell Mr. Metcalfe that?
I agree. That email and the following correspondence is not as clear as it could have been or should have been.
Well, it's wholly misleading, isn't it?
With hindsight, yes, it is.
Yes. I mean, yesterday you said that there'd been a lapse on your part in not keeping the CWCT informed of the thought processes. But this isn't just a lapse, is it? You've actually drafted an email that suggests that positive steps are happening, and they would have reasonably thought that was about the FAQ, yes?
Yes, on reflection, that is what they would have reviewed, yes.
Did you discuss your response to Mr. Metcalfe with anybody else at the BRE before sending it?
No.
Did you talk to Debbie Smith about it?
No.
And what did you mean when you said there's a note has been drafted and revisited? What do you mean by that?
So I'd put original thoughts down at the time, and I had revisited those following the various discussions that were ongoing, and I hoped to send them something that would be my collected thoughts on the points that they had raised.
Right, I see. But what they wanted was something that could be raised with the department so that the department could clarify this definitively, yes?
Yes.
So some notes from you weren't going to take matters any further forward, were they?
No, they wouldn't have.
And you also knew from the very outset, thinking back to Brenda Apted's email, that the CWCT itself was wondering whether it should be putting out guidance clarifying this area. Can you see that the effect of what you're doing here is potentially meaning that they're not acting in that way because they're waiting for you to do it?
Yes. On reflection, I can see that, yes.
If we look at the next email up in the chain, we can see... before we go to that, are you saying that you were drafting up text for the next review of ADB, without even speaking to Brian Martin about that?
No, I was picking up the points that had been raised in the CWCT to try to understand what the question they were asking, to understand what it was that they were trying to address.
Right, I see. If we go up the next email, so David Metcalfe, he says, back to you on the 13th of March. Hi, Sarah, thanks for getting back to me. It was my understanding that we would have the opportunity to comment on the draft. Is that still your intention? We are still receiving numerous inquiries from our members on the subject, so it would be useful to see what's being proposed so that we can give the correct advice. So they're absolutely relying on you, aren't they, to do something so they can go back to their members and give the correct advice, yes?
That's the tone of the email, yes.
Yes. And then at the top of the chain, you respond again. Hi, David. Yes, we will circulate. Yes?
Yes.
Again, that's wholly misleading, isn't it?
That gives the wrong impression based on the response that he's asked for, yes.
Now, we've heard in oral evidence from David Metcalfe, and we have the emails, that there was just no response from you at all thereafter. What we can see is that David Metcalfe chased for a response in writing from you on numerous dates. He chased on the 18th of August 2015, on the 14th of October 2015, on the 2nd of November 2015, on the 10th of November 2015. Do you remember receiving these chasing emails from Mr. Metcalfe?
I don't recall explicitly the dates when they received, but yes, I'm aware there were chases followed.
So what were you thinking when you were getting these chasing emails and you were not getting back to him? Why was that, and how were you justifying that to yourself?
At that point, nothing further had moved forward from my side, and as I say, on reflection, I should have contacted him directly and explained to him what was going on, and I didn't. Right.
And again, did you talk to anybody else within the BRE about this? Did you say, oh, I'm getting chased by David Metcalfe, he needs an answer, I can't give him an answer, what should I do? Did you ever talk to anybody else about it?
I would, yes, I would probably have shared it with the team, just to say this is still ongoing. And as I say, that is my on reflection, my biggest failing is not going back to them and saying, this is the approach that we think needs to be taken. It needs to go back through the department to the ADB revision.
Right. Do you remember asking Debbie Smith what you should do about this situation?
It would have been discussed. I would have mentioned it to her, yes.
Right. And what, no one in the team said you better go back to him and respond?
I don't recall that, no. I don't recall the conversation being in that way.
David Metcalfe says he also left you a number of voicemail messages, but you never responded to those either. Do you remember receiving voicemail messages from him?
No, I'm not aware of those.
Did you think to find out what advice the CWCT or anyone else was giving on the interpretation of that paragraph in that period, and that period where you weren't responding?
No.
Did you think about what the problems might be if they were carrying on giving advice that these panels could be used in circumstances where you knew that there were problems with that?
No, I didn't.
And why not? Why was that not something of concern to you?
My role, my understanding was that these were discussions that around interpretation were not within the scope of my my day-to-day activities. And I say with reflection, looking back now, I can see that they were relying or looking to us to provide that information. I was of the view that that information and that confirmation was rested with MHCLG. So it wasn't something that I was confirming what the wider applications of this guidance in industry was being used or sought for.
Right, but you don't say that back to the CWCT either, do you? You don't say, actually, I've reflected on this and we simply can't give this guidance. You must go to the department.
Insofar as the offer to assist and that back from the original meeting, I thought it was clear that people understood that it was MHCLG who were the route for that. But as I say, on reflection and on review of these documents in the passage of time, then it would appear that they were not looking at it in that way.
Well, it's specifically minuted in the minutes of the meeting that it was you that was tasked with speaking to Brian Martin about this FAQ, yes?
Yes, and having had that conversation earlier in the year with them,
yeah,
that was my understanding that was their position of custodianship of that information and that interpretation.
Yeah. Were you ever instructed not to respond to the CWCT?
No.
Did you ever discuss with Dr. Smith whether you should respond?
No.
Do you remember her being aware, though, that you were being chased?
Yes, she was aware.
And what did she say when you spoke to her about it?
That was where the discussions that the scope of what was being asked for was such that it really needed to sit within the revision of the AD and not as an FAQ.
Right. So she didn't give you any advice about how to handle the message back to the CWCT?
No.
Now, we know that...
Are we going away from these emails for a moment?
Yes, probably. So,
because I feel that there's a point here that ought to be raised so that Dr. Colwell can deal with it. Dr. Colwell, one view of this succession of emails that we've been seeing, one possible view is that you were deliberately stringing Mr. Metcalfe along
I appreciate
as
that.
long as you could, and then you got to the point when you simply ignored him. What would you say about that?
No, I can fully following that chain, I can fully agree that is a course that that could be taken forward, and that was not my intention, no. But I fully accept that on reflection, I should have closed this down much earlier and much more effectively.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Was there any sense in which you were influenced by Dr. Smith's reaction previously to the work that the CWCT were proposing to do in this area? You remember we looked at her email which said we don't want the fire safety mantle passing to the CWCT. Did that in any way influence you in terms of not wanting to give them a definitive answer so that they could take the initiative?
No, I don't believe that was the case.
When you say I don't believe that was the case, why?
I worked on developing an understanding based for the questions that they had raised in that meeting, and how that might best be clarified and moved out. So I continued to work on that.
Right, I see. And just to be clear, who made the final decision within the BRE that no FAQ route was going to be pursued? Was that Dr. Smith?
I believe that came as a conversation between Dr. Smith and myself, yes. It
But she's the senior, yes?
Yeah.
Did she take that final decision that the FAQ route was not one you were going to go down?
It was agreed between us, so yes, in that sense, yes.
Right. Now, you also had a meeting with the NHBC in November 2014. I just want to look briefly at that. On the 27th of November 2014, you, together with Steve Manchester and Stephen Howard, met with John Lewis, Steve Evans, Graham Perrier and Dave White from the NHBC at the BRE in Watford. Do you remember that meeting?
Yes.
John Lewis has made some notes of that meeting. They're at NHB 500829. There we have them at page 2. So these are, perhaps we could just go back up and just orientate ourselves. This is John Lewis's summary of some meetings that he sent to Steve Evans. So it's an internal summary by NHBC. If we go back to page 2, we can see a list of those present. You're present, Steve Manchester, Steve Howard, and then NHBC people. And then we can see at bullet points 1, and it goes over to the next page, you and Stephen Howard explain various matters to the NHBC in relation to BS 8414 and classification to BR 135. Do you remember that?
Yes.
I want to just ask you a couple of points about this. Bullet point 6 on that page, we can see it says SC Sarah Colwell stated that with regards to mechanical performance, the key criteria are rate of fire spread and ongoing burning. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that an accurate record of what you said?
I'm sorry, I couldn't reflect from 2014 as to whether that was what was stated.
Well, tell us this. Is that your view, that when you're looking at mechanical performance of these large-scale systems, the key criteria are rate of fire spread and ongoing burning?
No.
I see. So you don't remember saying that? Or don't think you would have said that?
I think the sentence is actually the key criteria in determining performance are mechanical performance, rate of fire spread and ongoing burning.
Right, I see. Okay. Let's go to point 9A in the notes, which are on page 3. We can see it says this. Sarah Colwell clarified the following. A, the wording of paragraph 12.7 of ADB includes all major components of a cladding system, including the external finish. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, is that correct? Did you give that clarification?
If I was asked my opinion, then as I said previously, my opinion of 12.7 was that it included the elements of the external wall construction.
Well, the phrase that's used here is said, including the external finish, and we were interested in that. Did you use the word finish?
Again, I apologise. This is a set of notes from meeting 14. I can't recollect the fine detail of that, and that would not be my interpretation of that, as we've discussed over the last few days.
Yes.
I believe the final finish was as per diagram 40.
Yes, well, that's what I was going to put to you, as you were saying yesterday, that you thought everything had to be limited combustibility but the finish, but the coating, but the paint. But this wording here, as recorded in these notes, does give a different impression, yes?
Yes.
But you can't help us with how that came to be, and you have no recollection of that meeting, no?
I have no recollection of the detail of that, to that level of that meeting, no.
Yeah. But we can agree, I think, that you were providing this clarification of paragraph 12.7 to the NHBC in this meeting, yes?
If I was asked for my opinion of that, then that would have been what I would have said.
Yes. You weren't saying only the department can tell you what it means. You were giving a view on it, yes?
I would imagine, given the way that the meetings would have taken place, it would have been, well, what is your view? And that would have been, well, my view is.
Yes.
It would not have been the department's view, because the department are the only people that can give that view. That would be my view.
No, I appreciate that, but clearly the NHBC thought it was something important that they wanted to do, to come and speak to you and Stephen Howard and others to get clarification on these points, yes?
The objective of the meeting was to discuss the testing to 8414 and BR 135. If that had come up as part of the conversation, which it looks as though a number of points were, then that is how that was reported back.
Right. And then if we look at the heading under the summary, there's a heading action following the meeting that's underlined. And if we look at the second paragraph there, it says NHBC followed up its meeting with BRE with an email, copy enclosed with this email, to Dr Sarah Colwell, clarifying what it feels is its position from a BC building control point of view. NHBC has drafted a revision to the BCA guidance note, use of combustible cladding materials on residential buildings, and requested SC to advise of any inaccuracies. A response to this email is currently awaited. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, that's a reference, we're pretty confident, is to BCA Technical Guidance Note 18, which I just want to ask you about now. Now, in your witness statement, I don't think we need to turn it up, at page 69, paragraph 446, you said that you weren't aware of the publication at the time and only became aware of it in late 2015. Now, this is a meeting in November 2014. Do you agree that it looks like you would have become aware of that guidance earlier than that?
I believe that I became aware of the final published version in 15. I'm not aware of the of when that document was published. No.
Right, I see. If we go to NHB 403198, we can see there's an email, it's a long email from John Lewis to you on the 4th of December 2014. It's a long email, as I say, and I'm not going to go through all of the detail of it, but can you recall receiving this email from John Lewis?
If it was sent to me, then yes, I would have received it.
Right, and would you have read it if you'd received it from John Lewis?
I would have looked at it in relation to commenting on 8414 and 501. I wouldn't have offered any comment or opinion back on the approved document elements of it.
Right. So the section I wanted to ask you about first was in the second paragraph, there's a heading approved document B in bold. And if we pick it up in the second to last line of that paragraph, you can see in the middle of the line, it says, we understand that for external walls over 18 metres in height, ADB section 12 gives guidance on 2 acceptable methods of assessing the envelope design and construction. External surfaces should comply with diagram 40 in paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9, All insulation and filler materials should be class A2, S3, D2 or better. All cavity barriers and fire stopping guidance needs to be followed. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
So they're setting out their understanding of the requirements of ADB. Now, it doesn't appear that John Lewis had understood your view, which was that the external surfaces should also comply with 12.7 and needed to be of limited combustibility, does it?
No, it wouldn't appear to be so.
No. Did you go back and correct him?
No,
Why not?
because I didn't go back and comment on text associated with the approved document.
But why not go back and say, well, there is some debate within the industry about this, there's some consternation, we know it needs clarifying. Why not at least fill him in about what had been going on with clause 12.7, so that at least they're in the picture about that?
I didn't.
Right. If we go to page 2 of this email and the third paragraph down in bold, he asks another question. I'm not going to read it all out, but basically he says, when reading the classification report, do we treat all of these 3 criteria? And you can see he means external fire spread, internal fire spread and mechanical performance with equal importance, or can the system be considered to achieve a pass if certain criteria have been satisfied? Now, we can't see you ever responding to questions like this. Did you ever respond?
I don't believe I responded to that email, no.
Again, why not?
In a lot of these cases, we were not getting involved in writing the industry guidance around these points, and the timelines to go through these was probably missed in this particular case.
Okay. If we go to the third paragraph from the bottom of this email, we can see, so it's the paragraph above the one in bold with a 2. There's a paragraph that reads, to this end, the Building Control Alliance, a body set up with membership of both public sector and private sector building control professionals, has updated its guidance document. And then you can see he gives the name, to incorporate guidance on this aspect of BR 135, yes?
Yes.
And in the next paragraph, we can see that he requests your comments on the document. If you look towards the end of that paragraph, we can see he says, and whilst we would welcome your comments on all of the document, these are the paragraphs on which we'd most appreciate your feedback. Do you see that?
Yes.
And we'll see in a moment. So he sends you a draft of the BCA technical guidance note and asks you for comments. Now, do you remember reading that draft note at the time?
No.
Why wouldn't you have read that and looked at what the NHBC was saying about these kind of topics?
There were numbers of industry guidance documents being discussed, and to go through and review and comment on all was not something that we did.
Right.
I mean, was the BRE concerned about appearing to lend its weight or authority to some of these industry documents? I find it puzzling that you...
To some extent, yes, that we couldn't, to be independent to all and to support the numbers, it was a balance at times as to where we put the resource and which areas we were able to help with.
Right, thank you.
We don't need to go to it, but we know that John Lewis emailed you again on the 10th of December 2013, chasing for a response to this email, and it appears that you never responded. Is that right? There was just never any response to this or the chaser email?
If there's no record, then yeah, that would be correct.
Right. I just want to look briefly at the draft of the guidance note he sends you. It's at NHB 403199. So here we can see we've got a draft of BCA technical guidance note. We can tell it's a draft because various things at the top haven't been completed. If you look at the box guidance just below, halfway down the page, there's a section that deals with buildings below 18 metres, and then there's a heading, the second heading that's underlined, combustibility of cladding components in buildings exceeding 18 metres in height. And we can see it reads, where the building exceeds 18 metres in height, paragraph 12.7 of ADB 2 refers to the need for limited combustibility of all elements of a cladding system, both above and below 18 metres. Do you see that?
Yes.
And we know that in the final versions of this guidance, that became what was called option 1. I don't even remember reading that. Option 1 was that all elements of the cladding system needed to be limited combustibility. Now, what I want to ask you is, that's a pretty simple piece of guidance, isn't it, to give? Why couldn't the BRE work towards, putting that in an FAQ or putting that out there more generally, or proposing that to the department? This didn't need to be very complicated, did it?
I'd say I'm reading this document as you're presenting it to me, so I wouldn't want to comment more widely than whether that's addressing the scope or not.
I see. Let's move forward in time then. There was a second CWCT fire group meeting held on the 17th of March 2016. Let's turn up for the minutes of that meeting. They're at CLG 3019440. We can see on page 1 that you attended. You're the fifth name down in those present, as did Brian Martin, Stuart Taylor of Wintec, David White from the NHBC, Alan Keeler and David Metcalfe of the CWCT, and various others, including representatives from Kingspan and Cider Eyes. And if we go to page 2, towards the bottom of the page, there's a section, just bring up page 2, headed Combustibility of Material. And we can see that reads, Approved Document B, Clause 12.7, requires insulation and filler material in the external walls of tall buildings to be of limited combustibility. BCA Guidance Note 18 extends this requirement to all material in the wall. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, by this point, March 2016, had you read BCA Technical Guidance Note 18?
I can't remember the dates by which those that would have been read.
Right. We know there were two versions of that technical guidance note, version 0 that came out in June 2014 and version 1 that came out in June 2015. So it had been out for some time prior to this meeting on the 17th of March 2016. Do you remember being familiar with the content of it?
No, I don't remember being familiar with the content of them.
Right. You were asked in your witness statement whether you agreed that BCA Technical Guidance Note extended the requirement to all material in the wall, and your response was that you'd simply not considered that point at the time and thereafter had no particular view. Does that remain your evidence?
Yes.
I see. So you never formed a view about whether or not the wording used in BCA Technical Guidance Note 18 extended the requirement to all materials in the wall?
No.
I see. It just seems a little odd that you hadn't formed a view of that at the time, given we know you've been receiving inquiries about the meaning and scope of Clause 12.7 since at least 2013. And we know you'd met with NHBC, with Wintec and the CWCT on that subject. You tried to start drafting some outlines that might address this amongst other points. It seems very odd that that quite key piece of guidance wasn't something that came to your attention. Can you explain that?
I didn't. I viewed it as a piece of industry guidance. I didn't take it as a particular reference point.
Okay, looking again at the minutes, below that there's a paragraph that reads, "It was accepted that clause 12.7 was poorly written and open to interpretation. The title of the clause is also misleading," and then the title's given, insulation materials / products. "And this will be changed in the next revision of ADB." Do you see that?
Yes.
And over at the top of page 3, it says, "The term filler material was intended to be a catch-all, as it was not possible to list all the materials that should be covered by the clause. In addition, there were people arguing that certain materials used in a facade build-up, such as expanded polystyrene in some instances, were not there for their insulating properties, but to pad out the facade, and were therefore excluded from the clause." Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, in your witness statement, you tell us that you can't recall who it was that accepted that 12.7 was poorly written and open to interpretation, or that the title of the clause was misleading, and that you can't recall whether or not Brian Martin accepted those matters. Is that still the case, that you can't recall who said those things?
I don't have direct recollection of who made those particular statements, no.
Right. And you can't recall who it was that stated that filler material was intended to be a catch-all?
I would have envisaged that was Brian.
Right, yes. I mean, in 2016, he was the department's principal construction professional with responsibility for ADB. He owned the document, didn't he?
Yes.
I mean, can you think of anybody else at that meeting that would have accepted the matters that we saw accepted there about the lack of clarity, or had provided information here about the background to the term filler material?
My expectation is that would have been Brian speaking to that point.
Right. Did you understand that explanation being given at the meeting for the use of the term filler material, that it was intended to be a catch-all, as it was not possible to list all the materials that should be covered by the clause?
Yes.
Did you consider that perhaps the words all materials might have been a better phrase as a catch-all, if that's what was being proposed?
Yeah, it was by that stage accepted that there was a need for a review of what that wording looked like.
Right. Did you think back to the drafting of paragraph 12.7 in 2005, when Brian Martin had circulated a draft text which proposed exactly that, the use of the phrase all materials as opposed to using the word filler? Did you think back to that during this meeting?
No.
Right. Now, if we just turn briefly to Brian Martin's witness statement, CLG 30194669 at page 49. CLG 30194669, page 49. So at paragraph 138, in the last 2 lines of 138, we can see that Brian Martin's saying there that I undertook to change this misleading clause in the next revision of ADB. Do you see that there?
Sorry, would it be possible to expand that slightly?
Yeah, so bottom of the page, we're looking at paragraph 138. Before the text that's in italics, we can see, if we pick it up, if we pick it up 4 lines up, he says, indeed, at the meeting it was accepted, as is recorded, that paragraph 12.7 of ADB was open to interpretation. Acting on behalf of the department, I undertook to change this misleading clause in the next revision of ADB. Yes?
Yes.
So, did you agree with him at that point that the clause was misleading?
Yes.
You say in your witness statement, this, I don't think we need to go to it, paragraph 656 on page 97, that it was apparent to you at this meeting that a clearer definition of the term filler was being sought. But there wasn't any definition of filler, was there, in circulation at this point?
No.
Did it occur to you at this stage, so we're in early 2016, that something might need to be done to clarify the meaning and scope of paragraphs 12.6 and 12.7 more urgently than just the next revision of approved document B?
I think, given that the department had accepted the undertaking to move that forward, they were party to that urgency, and therefore would move it forward.
Did you understand the department, and in particular Brian Martin, to consider the matter to be one of some urgency?
I believe by that stage, I believe they did, because it had been in the debating point for some time by that stage. So,
right.
I felt they understood that the need to do this with some degree of urgency. Yes.
But just thinking back to the chronology, you'd met with Brian Martin, we know, in January 2014 when you'd raised these issues with him, and he said he was going to take it further. We're now 2 years on from that, over 2 years on. What gave you the impression they were going to do anything as a matter of any urgency, given they'd not taken any action in those 2 years?
The sense from that particular meeting, and the undertaking to move that forward, I thought by that stage would be their driver.
Was there anything Brian Martin did or said at this time which led you to believe that he did consider the matter to be urgent?
I think his acceptance that there was this need for change was, sort of the route map for making that change happen.
Right. And did you consider it to be urgent?
I believe by that point that it was one of the key things that needed to be changed in the revision. Yes.
But did you consider it to be urgent, not just a key change that needed to happen in a revision in the future? Did you consider it to be urgent?
Yes, it needed to be changed.
And changed quickly, yes?
Yeah, and yeah, it needed to happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was there any discussion at this point about the FAQ route again? Did anybody say, well, there's the FAQ route, we could think about that again? But did that get discussed again in 2016? No,
I believe it didn't. I believe it ceased to have discussion.
Right. Now, by this time, so March 2016, were you aware of the fires at the Torch residential building in Dubai in February 2015 and at the Address Downtown Hotel in December 2015?
Yes.
So 2 really significant fires had occurred in the UAE in this period, yes?
Yes.
Did you know that those involved ACMPE?
Yes.
In March 2016, were you still engaged in any work in the UAE in relation to their regulatory codes or anything to do with external fire spread?
I can't recall exact dates as I sit here now, but yes, I would be aware of that.
Right. Let's look at an email, BRE 30475991, page 2. There's an email sent on the 3rd of January 2016 to Pavlos Vatavlis of European Aluminium, And in paragraph 2, it's the one at the bottom of that page, you say, apologies, but I can't make any of the suggested meeting dates as I'll be in the Middle East in January and on leave in February. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does that help you as to whether you were still working in the Middle East on this topic in January 2016?
I don't believe I would have been. That January meeting would have been in relation to the large international exhibition that happens at that time.
Right. But when you went out to the Middle East, did you discuss these ACMPE cladding fires with anybody during your trip?
I don't know. I don't believe the latter ones were subjects to discussion with any of the authorities out there at that time.
Yeah. And you were aware, weren't you, of the fire at the Ajman Towers in Dubai on the 28th of March 2016, less than 2 weeks after this meeting of the CWCT fire group?
I'm sorry, I don't recall the specific building, but yeah, those types of fires were
Let's
reported.
look at an email to help you. CLG 1308111. Here's a discussion about that fire between Martin Shipp, David Crowder, Kira Holland and Brian Martin. Now, you're not copied into these emails, but if we look at the top email in the chain, Martin Shipp writes to the others on the 29th of March 2016. He says, I know, smiley face, we can see it's about the Ajman fire. Huge blaze hits UAE residential towers. And then the second line, he says, Sarah thinks it's burning debris landing on balconies. Do you see that?
Yes.
So it would appear that you were aware of that fire at the time. Did you know that that involved ACMPE?
Yes.
And what about the fire at the Sulafa Tower, 75-storey block in Dubai Marina in July 2016? Were you aware of that fire?
As I say, I apologise if I don't recognise them by building name.
Did any of these cladding fires, these further fires, alert you to the need to provide clearer guidance to industry on this topic as a matter of some urgency?
As I said, I hadn't made the connection at that time of the extent to which ACM was being used in the UK market.
Right. You tell us in your witness statement, this is page 104, paragraph 709, and you're being asked about this in the context of what was going on in 2016. You were asked when you understood that the next revision of the approved document was to take place, and you said you understood it would take place imminently. What was it that had given you the impression that the next review of ADB was imminent in 2016?
Brian's response to that meeting with CWCT.
Right. And what was it about his response which led you to believe that it was imminent?
My impression at that time was that it was about to take place. It was about to be announced. It was about to be undertaken.
Right. Were you aware that no consultation process had begun by March 2016?
I was aware it hadn't been launched, no.
A revised approved document could have been, in reality, many years away. Did you appreciate that at the time?
I understood that was a possibility, yes.
Let's look at some other emails. And these are emails from January 2016. If we can go to BLM 50153, this is an email chain between you and Nick Jenkins at the time of Booth Muri in January and February 2016. And I want to start with the bottom email in the chain, which is in the middle of page 3. It's an email sent to you by Nick Jenkins on the 20th of January 2016. And we can see the subject is use of ACM cladding panels on buildings exceeding 18 metres in height. And he says, I hope this finds you well. We haven't met, however, I understand that you might be the best person to help me with some clarification I'm seeking in relation to my understanding of the current UK regulations as they apply to wall constructions for buildings over 18 metres featuring rain screen panels formed from ACMs. He goes on, last week I attended a Siderise BRE Facades conference on the topic of fire safety. During the day, I asked some questions of the panel relating to the permissible use of rain screen cladding panels formed from various grades of ACM, aluminium composite materials, when used as part of multi-layered wall systems for buildings over 18 metres. There was some ambiguity in the answers provided by the panel. And then he goes on and explains why he thinks there's some ambiguity, and he gives quite a detailed explanation of the problems with the guidance and the different interpretations of it. Now, just pausing there for a minute, did you attend that Siderise BRE Facades conference on the 16th of January 2016?
No.
No. I think we know your colleague Stephen Howard did attend. We've seen a video of him on the stage at that conference when Nick Jenkins was asking a key question about this. Did Stephen Howard come back to you after that conference and tell you about the concerns Nick Jenkins had raised?
No.
So you didn't get any feedback from Stephen Howard after that conference?
I'm not aware of having a conversation about that from that conference, no.
Right. I'm not going to read all the detail of his explanation of the guidance, etc., but I want to pick it up. It's two paragraphs before the end of this page. There's a paragraph beginning, in our experience. It's about 6 lines up in that last very meaty part. And he says this: in our experience of supplying fabricated ACM rain screen panels to specialist cladding contractors in the UK market, we are rarely asked to provide such A2 rated ACM materials. The vast majority of ACM panels we are asked to provide for architectural application are either Alucobond Plus, Alipolic FR or Larsen FR products, all of which are classified as B S1 D0 in accordance with BSEN 13501. And thus, whilst they can be classified as products that are hard to burn, are not accepted as being of limited combustibility in accordance with Table A7 Appendix A of ADB. And then he goes on. In many instances, it's not even the B1, S1, D0 rated ATM panels we are asked to supply, but standard polyethylene core material ACM that burns quite efficiently. What's more, I'm aware of many tall residential buildings recently constructed in the UK where such panels are installed in combination with various foil-faced rigid foam thermal insulation boards, which are also not accepted as being of limited combustibility in accordance with Table A7, Appendix A of ADB 2. And then over the page, he says, at the top paragraph, as a responsible supplier, Boothmura Euroclad would like to put a guidance note out to the market written specifically on routes to compliance in relation to the use of ACM rain screen cladding panels and associated thermal insulation products used as part of multi-layered built-up wall systems. Before we publish any such guidance, we're ensuring that we have our facts straight. With that in mind, I would very much appreciate your thoughts on my understanding of the current regulations. I look forward to hearing back from you. Now, do you remember receiving this email?
Yes, it's obviously come to me.
Did you read it when you received it?
I imagine, yes, I would have read it.
Let's go back a page to the bottom of page 3, where we can see that last paragraph. What was your reaction to the news that standard PE cored ACM panels with a polyethylene core had been used and were being supplied for use on many tall residential buildings recently? What was your reaction to that news?
Surprised.
Now, given your knowledge about the dangers of this product dating all the way back to 2001 and your more recent work in the Middle East, surely your reaction was one of horror at this point, yes?
I say I was surprised, yes.
Wasn't this a red alert situation that required urgent action? on your part, on the BRE's part?
And as a result of it, referred it to the department, yes.
What do you mean by that?
That email was referred on to MHCLG to follow up.
And in what terms did you forward it on?
I forwarded it on to, or responded to Nick saying you needed to talk to the department about this.
Yes, well, we'll come to that in a moment, but help me with this. Forget the department for a moment. Didn't you and the BRE think at this point, wow, we need to do something urgently? This is a very serious situation.
And referring it to the department, as I said, who had the position to take action more widely was my route with that.
Why didn't you encourage Nick Jenkins to produce the guidance that he was referring to?
Because I wanted him to engage with the department. That's why I said you need to talk to the department.
Did you speak to Brian Martin? Did you pick up the phone to Brian Martin, who you knew well, and press him to do something?
At that point, no. I forwarded that. I forwarded Nick to Brian on the assumption that the two would then work together to address that. It was my understanding and has been that the department would take that message forward and action if and as required.
Did you consider whether the BRE itself ought to put out a statement to industry, alerting industry to the dangers associated with this product and the concerns that the BRE had about using it on tall residential buildings?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
It was not a route that BRE had taken those circumstances. We referred it to the department.
Why don't we see presentations by the BRE, articles by the BRE? We know, for example, that David Crowder, he went out and he gave lots of presentations about the Lakanal House fire to many different local authorities. Why don't we see anything from the BRE about the dangers associated with ACMPE, particularly from this point onwards, once you know for sure at this point that it is being used on tall buildings? Why don't we see that?
We spoke where we were invited to speak. Those were the type of industry environments we spoke in.
But did anyone give any consideration to whether you ought to start producing guidance, presentations to industry as part of your ongoing work, attending conference, etc., alerting people to the dangers posed by these ACM polyethylene panels, particularly given your experience of these Middle East fires?
No, it was not a role I'd ever been involved in previously, so it wasn't something I was would have thought to participate in.
Now we can see, so this email is dated the 20th of January 2016. There's no reply from you, because if we move to the next email up in the chain, about halfway down page 2, we can see that Nick Jenkins sends a chaser email on the 1st of February 2016.
Yes.
So he says, hi Sarah, regarding my email, I received an auto reply at the time from which I understand you returned to the office last Tuesday. Could you please acknowledge receipt of my query and advise when I could expect to receive a response from the BRE on the matter? Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And he chases you again on the 9th of February. If we go to the top of page 2, we can see on the 9th of February 2016, he chases you again. Hi Sarah, could you please advise when you expect to be able to review my query issued on the 20th of January? Apologies if you're not the right person in the BRE to be dealing with this.
Yes.
And then at the bottom of page 1, we can see you do reply on the 9th of February 2016. We go to the bottom of page 1. We can see right at the bottom, you say to him, copying in Stephen Howard, hi Nick, apologies for not replying sooner. I had missed your previous correspondence. I will follow, try and look at the at it this week and come back to you. Do you see that?
Yes.
You copy Stephen Howard into that email. Had you discussed this correspondence with him by this time?
Because of Stephen's role in this, in the passive group, at that point, I copied him in so he was aware of the correspondence.
Yeah. Given the terms of Nick Jenkins's email, why do you need to be chased to get back to him?
I'd been out of the office. As said, I came back in, working through my emails, and picked that email up. His chaser came in around the time that I'm working through emails.
If we go up to the next email in the chain, we can see that you write on the 12th of February 2016, "Dear Nick, further to my earlier email, we have now had a chance to look at your email, and I would suggest that you contact Brian Martin at DCLG," you give his email address, "with regard to this request, as they are the body with responsibility for this document and therefore any interpretations associated with it." Do you see that?
Yes.
So that was your response to Nick Jenkins, wasn't it?
That's correct.
Just simply to refer to the department, nothing else.
No, that's correct.
And then if we look at the email at the very top of page 1, we can see an internal email in which Phil Cook, having been informed by Nick Jenkins that you've referred to the matter, writes this: "Nick, what a buck-passing load of incompetence." Okay, so we go through the DCLG. Would you contact them for a response, Phil? Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you disagree with that description, given what we've just seen?
Given that MHCRG needed to be made aware of it and were the people able to provide the definitive guidance he was seeking, then that was the department were the appropriate people to address it. I'm not quite sure why he felt that we would speak on behalf of DCLG.
Right, so I think it sounds like you don't agree with that description of BRE's conduct at this point.
No.
In your email, you said, "We have now had a chance to look at your email." Can you help us with this? Who within the BRE had seen Nick Jenkins as correspondent? Was that just Stephen Howard or anybody else?
It would have been Steve.
And what about Dr. Smith?
I don't know whether she was aware of it. No.
Now, if we go on with this correspondence, Mr. Chairman, I'm aware of the time, but I am very close to the end of my questions. I've got one email string to go to and then some follow-up questions. I'd like to finish it in one run, if that's okay.
Yes, all right.
Thank you. If we go to CLG 3031093, there are some later parts of this correspondence between Nick Jenkins and Brian Martin. And if we look at page 5 of this string, towards the top of the page, sorry, this is CLG 3031093. So here's page 5, and we can see that Nick Jenkins, at the top of this page, writes to Brian Martin on the 16th of February 2016. He says, "Hi Brian, I'm forwarding this query to you as recommended by Sarah Colwell of the BRE. As you will note from the correspondence below, Sarah advises the DCLG are the body with responsibility for ADB2. This matter is currently the topic of much discussion in the construction industry, and if one thing is evident, that there is much confusion and misunderstanding, your soonest review of the matter would therefore be most welcome." And if we go down to page 10, just to set this in context, the email that Mr. Jenkins originally sent to you is there at page 10. And then if we go back up to page 4, about halfway up the page, we can see that Mr. Martin responds to Nick Jenkins and he copies you in to that response. Do you see that? It's the 16th of February 2016 at 17:09. So you and Stephen Howard are copied to what Brian Martin says. He says, "Hi Nick, it's for the designer and the building control body to consider if requirement B4 has been met. ADB give guidance on this by saying that the external walls should not provide a medium for fire spread in tall buildings. It then offers two approaches, a set of rules or a full-scale test. In the rules, we deliberately added the word filler to address things that form part of the cladding system that are not insulation but could provide a medium for fire spread. I think the core of an ACP panel could reasonably be considered to be a filler, so unless the core material meets the rules, then the AD suggests a full-scale test. However, if the designer and building control body choose to do something else, then that's up to them. Do you see that?
Yes.
So we can see he's saying, I think the core of an ACP panel could reasonably be considered to be a filler. What was your reaction to this response?
It had clarified the word filler in that context, and as and that was their statement on that point.
But it's not a definitive answer, is it? Could reasonably be considered. He's not saying, yep, core of an ACM panel, absolutely caught by limited combustibility requirement, you can't use that.
And that is very much the style of Brian's response in that email.
What do you mean is the style of his response? Are you saying that was typical of the style in which he would respond to these kind of queries?
I believe so. I can't speak for him in the terms of how he writes, but that is typical of the type of response I'd seen.
Right. Did it surprise you that he was giving this response, which was not definitive about the position? Did that surprise you?
I think I was used to seeing that style, so probably didn't read anything beyond it.
Right. Because at the CWCT meeting just a month later, there does appear to be a more definitive answer being given in the minutes of that meeting, where it said BCA technical guidance note extends this requirement to all material in the wall. When you were at that meeting, did you think to yourself, well, yes, he's saying that now, but just a month before, he's given not a very definitive answer to Nick Jenkins. Did that occur to you?
No, I didn't make that connection.
If we go to the bottom of page 3 of these emails and the top of page 4, we can see Nick Jenkins tried again later that night. He writes back to Brian Martin, again copying you in. If you look at the bottom of page 3, he says, sorry, I think I can't quite see what's at the top of page 4 there. I think there's a paragraph. No, so I want the bottom of page 3 and the top of page 4. Yes, here it is. That was it, sorry. If we go back to what we had there. He says, hi, Brian, many thanks for your prompt response. In light of the fires that have taken hold of a number of buildings clad in ACM panels in recent years, I also think that the core of ACM panels should most definitely be considered as a filler. Some ACM cores meet the rules of ADB, however, the ones commonly used in the UK at present don't. Do you see that?
Yes.
And he goes on, to the best of my knowledge, there have been no full-scale 8414 tests carried out to date on any wall constructions featuring any type of ACM panel. I am aware that 2 manufacturers of ACM have plans to have such tests carried out. This, however, unfortunately means that no existing buildings in the UK over 18 metres tall that feature ACM panels currently meet the B4 requirements. There are many such buildings and their numbers are growing. Whilst I appreciate it is for the designer and building control body to consider if requirement B4 has been met, I do think the current situation is of grave concern. Surely this justifies the requirement for a less ambiguous statement of the rules. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you remember noting Nick Jenkins's description of the situation as one of grave concern?
I note that he's re-emphasising. I noted he was re-emphasising the point to Brian. Yes.
Did that strike you at the time as heightening the urgency of the situation?
I don't recall having a particular response to it at that time. I read it as him restating what he had put in his earlier email.
Right. If we go up to the very top of this email chain, we can see that Brian Martin, his last reply, contains... Sorry, no, so I can see, yeah, that very top reply to Nick Jenkins, again copying you in. If you look at the second paragraph, he says this: "You're right, of course, constructions complying with the rules of thumb may well fail an 8414 test." Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, you told us yesterday you were surprised to see a similar statement by Brian Martin in an earlier email where he'd said that just because you followed the guidance in ADB doesn't mean that you would necessarily pass an 8414 test. Were you surprised to see that statement effectively being made again by Brian Martin here?
Yes.
Now, following this exchange in February 2016, did you discuss this correspondence or any of the concerns that Nick Jenkins had raised in it with Brian Martin?
No, I didn't.
Did you do anything or speak to anybody about what you'd learned about the historic and ongoing use of ACMP products in high-rise buildings from these emails?
No, I didn't follow them up beyond referring them to the department.
Can you clarify why, at no time before the Grenfell Tower fire, was any formal clarification provided by the BRE in response to the concerns which had been raised, for example, by the CWCT and Nick Jenkins?
I can confirm that no formal statement was made.
Can you explain why we see no correspondence whatsoever before the Grenfell Tower fire in which the BRE warns the department about the grave risks to life safety if action is not taken urgently to address the use of ACMPE in the UK market?
No statement to that effect was made to the department. They were made aware of the concerns that we were made aware of.
Can you explain why no such statement was made to industry by the BRE itself?
Statements of that nature were not publicly made by BRE. They were referred to the department for them to take action on.
Can you explain how that was professionally or ethically acceptable on your or the BRE's part?
We believed that the department were best placed to make those statements to the widest market.
Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end of my pre-prepared questions.
Yes, all right.
Perhaps if we could have the usual morning break and then we can also sweep up any final questions.
Well, we'll have the usual morning break at this point. And for the benefit of anyone who's watching, we'll say that any questions which may occur to people and that they wish to submit for consideration ought to be submitted within the morning break.
Yes.
We won't have a separate break. So we'll stop now and we'll resume, please, at 10 to 12. And at that stage, we'll see whether there are any more questions for you. All right?
Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you very much. Would you like to go to the usher, please?
Thank you.
Right, Grange, thank you. 10 to
Thank you.
12, please. Thank you. Would you ask Dr Colwell to come back in, please? Right, Dr Colwell. Well, I'm sorry it took a little longer to get organised than I'd suggested, but we'll now see if there are any more questions for you. Yes, Ms. Gray.
Yes, just a few short questions, thank you. First of all, have you ever discussed the Nick Jenkins emails or the results of Contract 1924 and particularly the ACM PE results with Mr Martin at any time since the fire at Grenfell Tower?
No, I don't believe I have.
Right. And we've been through a lot over the last, well, now 4 days. If you had the chance again, what would you have done differently?
As we said previously, the period of reflection with the CWCT activities from 2013 absolutely would have handled in a different way.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. And thank you, Dr Colwell, for coming and assisting us with our investigations. We are very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Dr Colwell, it's right that I should thank you on behalf of the panel as a whole for coming to give us your evidence. I'm sorry it took a long time, and I know that it was difficult for you at times.
Thank you.
It's been very helpful to us to hear what you have to tell us, so we are very grateful to you for coming here to give your evidence.
Thank
and
you.
now you're free to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms Grange. Now we have another witness.
Yes, Mr Millett will be taking Dr Debbie Smith. So
Thank
we
you.
just need a few minutes to...
We need a short break now for what we call housekeeping purposes.
you.
And you can ask the usher to come and get us as soon as you're ready.
We will. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, good morning. Good morning to you, good morning, Mr. Ali, and good morning to Ms. Stefan, who is listening in remotely. I now call the next witness, Dr. Debbie Smith, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Smith.
Good morning.
I understand you're going to make the affirmation.
I am,
Well, the words are on the screen. Would you read them out, please?
yes. I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Please sit down and make yourself comfortable. Right. Yes, Mr. Millett, when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Ms. Smith. Can I start by thanking you very much for attending the inquiry and assisting us with your evidence? We're very grateful to you. If you have any difficulty understanding any of my questions that I'm going to put to you, then please just say, and I can either repeat the question or put it in a different way. Can I also ask you please to keep your voice up so that the transcriber who sits to your right can hear what you're saying and get it down clearly on the transcript. It also helps, please, not to nod or shake your head. You have to say yes or no, as the case may be.
Yes.
We'll take the usual scheduled breaks, but if you feel you need a break at any other time, we can take a break.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to start with your witness statement to the inquiry, which is at BRE 405624, please. That's the first page of it. Can you confirm that that is the first page of your statement to the inquiry?
Yes, I can.
And if we go, please, to page 35, we can see a date and a signature, 10th July 2019. Is that signature above that date yours?
Yes, it is.
And have you read this witness statement recently?
Yes, I have.
And can you confirm that its contents are true?
Yes, I can.
Have you discussed this witness statement or the evidence that you're going to give today and over the next few days with anybody before coming here?
No, I haven't.
I'm going to begin then with your background, your qualifications and your training. Can we look please at page 2 of your statement, please, at paragraph 3. And you can see there that you graduated from the University of Birmingham in 1981 with an honours degree in metallurgy and materials science, yes?
Yes.
And you also say that you obtained a PhD in the same subjects for research entitled An Examination of the Dependence of the Hydrogen Solubility upon the Structure and Constitution of some Palladium-Cerium Solid Solution Alloys. Did that work relate to fire?
No, it didn't.
In paragraph 4, you say that in 1984 you joined the BRE, and which I think was then called the Fire Research Station, yes?
Yes.
And I think it was a government organisation at that stage, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And your post was as a higher scientific officer in the fire dynamics section, yes?
Correct.
Before you joined, did you have any teaching or learning experience or education in fire?
No, I did not.
So you learnt on the job?
Yes, yes.
You were then promoted, I think, in 1989, as you say in paragraph 6, to senior scientific officer in the fire dynamics section, yes?
Yes.
And then in 1998, if we go to paragraph 8 on page 3, you can see that you became head of the computer simulation and reaction to fire team at the BRE.
Yes.
Now, at that stage, I think, or by then, the BRE had been privatised, hadn't it?
Yes, yes, in 1997.
In 1997, yes. And at that point, had you had any training or education in fire dynamics, or fire testing?
Yes, I had spent my whole time at the Fire Research Station being trained in fire dynamics and how to apply the experimental methodologies, etc.,
Right.
you know, in making the measurements.
Who trained you?
It was several people. Professor Jeff Cox, who has now retired from BRE, and I worked alongside other colleagues such as Richard Chitty and Dr Suresh Kumar.
Yes. And that was internal, in-house training, was it?
Yes, yes.
So you never went out to obtain a formal qualification in fire
No.
engineering, fire safety?
No, I mean, at that time, there were very few opportunities to do that. There were no universities, really, that were offering that kind of qualification. I did attend external training courses as they were available, and conferences and seminars and workshops, etc. I attended an experimental methods training course at Imperial College London, for example. So, at various points, depending on the work that I was undertaking, then I did training that was appropriate to the role that I was doing.
Now, paragraph 9 of your statement, you tell us that in 2006 you became Centre Director for the Fire Performance and Suppression at the BRE when those areas of business moved into BRE Certification Limited, yes?
Yes.
I think, is it right, at Companies House it says that you were made a Director of BRE Certification Limited on the 29th of April 2004, yes? That's what it says at Companies House. Can you verify that?
I can't. I would have to go back and look. I mean, if that's what it says at Companies House, that's probably correct.
Leaving aside the specific date, do you recall being made a Director of BRE Certification Limited at about that time?
Yes.
Yes.
And that was for a short period of time because there was then a reorganisation and a restructuring.
And you became, well, I think you ceased to be a Director in 2008.
Yes.
Yes. And why did you cease to become a Director?
Because of the reorganisation and so on that went on within BRE Group at that time.
Right.
It was decided that that BRE Global, as it was then, would have a much smaller board of directors because it was too large and too unwieldy, really, for the size of the company.
And in 2010, you became Centre Director for Fire Sciences and Building Products.
Correct.
Did you become a statutory director at that time?
No.
We don't think you did.
No. It's a job title in effect.
And what was your role between March 2008 when you resigned as a director and 2010 when you became Centre Director for Fire Sciences and Building Products?
I continued as the Centre Director for Fire Performance and Suppression.
Right. And in April 2016 you became Managing Director of BRE Global Limited, I think.
That's correct.
And then resigned from that role in April 2020, is that right?
That's correct.
Why did you resign?
I took on a BRE Group role at that point as Director of Sciences and Professional Development. So it was not just for BRE Global, it was for the group.
Right.
And then obviously, I suppose relevant to this, I retired then in April 2021.
That was a retirement, properly
Yes.
so called, was it?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And are you now in retirement?
Almost.
What are you?
Well, I've obviously been dealing with the Grenfell Inquiry and the provision of documents and helping BRE with providing that information in the period since April last year.
But other than that, you are retired?
I am.
In the sense most people would understand it?
Yes, I am.
Now, looking at paragraph 11, please, on the screen, you say and tracking through your career progression, in 2010 your role was Centre Director for Fire Sciences and Building Products. And in 2016, Managing Director of BRE Global, it's paragraph 13. Mm-hmm. And in April 2016, you were named on an inaugural list of the UK's top 50 women in engineering, published by the Daily Telegraph. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yes. You, I think, became a member, is this right, of the International Forum of Fire Research Directors in 2007.
Yes, that's correct.
And what does that organisation do?
So it's been in existence for a long time.
Since 1991, I think.
Yes, and basically it's an opportunity for the fire research directors of similar research organisations from across the world to get together to discuss issues that require research, work collaboratively, if that's appropriate, on particular topics.
Right. I see. Are you still a member?
No.
When did you cease to become a member?
When I retired from BRE. Yeah.
And to your recollection, were there members from the Middle East? UAE, Dubai?
No, I don't believe there were. There may be now, but at that time I don't believe there was anybody from the Middle
And
East.
did the work of that forum discuss major fires overseas of interest to the research community?
To some degree.
Now, in 2008, you were nominated to the editorial board of the Fire and Materials Journal.
Correct.
Who nominated you?
I don't know.
Right. Are you presumably...
I don't recall.
Right. Are you still a member?
No, not now.
And did your role involve suggesting particular articles?
No.
Right.
No, I mean, so that journal is basically a peer-reviewed journal, but it publishes articles that are submitted to it. They're not invited articles. They are, articles from the research community that are submitted to it and then reviewed and published.
Now, if you look at paragraph 15 of your statement, you say on the screen in front of you that you've been a fellow of the Institution of Fire Engineers since 2016. Mm-hmm. But before that, were you a member of the Institute of Fire Engineers?
No, I wasn't.
How did you come to be a fellow? Did you apply, or were you awarded the grade of fellow by a special board resolution?
No, I was invited to become a fellow by the board of the Institution of Fire Engineers.
Now, I want to ask you about the details of your role and your line management. Paragraph 32 of your statement. Well, in fact, let's take it more quickly than that. Sarah Colwell, in her statement, explains that you were her line manager in the reaction to fire team from 1997 onwards. Is that correct?
I think it would be 1998, but
Right.
as the head of...
And in that role, you had, as she puts it, direct oversight of her work.
insofar as, the line manager of Sarah, yes.
Yes. And that was the case until you left in April 2021?
No.
No? When did that stop?
Well, we've been through various iterations and reorganisations within BRE. I can't remember it would have stopped in 2016 when I became the managing director of BRE Global.
Oh, I see. Who became Sarah Colwell's line manager in 2016?
It would have been Dr. Julie Briegeler.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
You've
Yes.
solved a controversy.
Okay.
That's Julie Briegeler became her line manager at that date. And when did Julie Briegeler cease to be Dr. Colwell's line manager?
It would have been when Julie left the business, and which I think was probably beginning of 2021, around that sort of time. I can't remember the exact date, but...
Now, so far as Dr. Williams, Dr. Corinne Williams is concerned, is it right that you were also her line manager from 2002 to 2007?
Yes, that would have been when she was heading up the suppression
Yes.
area of activity.
And she, I think, was the business area manager for the fire suppression team.
Correct, yes.
Now, did you maintain direct oversight of both Dr. Williams and Dr. Colwell's activities?
Insofar as I was their line managers, however, they did report to other people, of course, depending upon the type of work that they were undertaking and the projects that they were undertaking.
I see.
So, if you were working on somebody else's project, you would be accountable to that person.
Right. But generally speaking, you would supervise and monitor the work done by Drs. Colwell and Williams.
Yes, especially from a performance point of view in terms of meeting KPIs and business plans and so on.
And did you meet them regularly?
Yes.
How often?
I can't recall exactly. It would have probably been monthly.
And did you review their written work?
On occasions, yes.
What occasions?
I mean, it would not be all the time. I mean, if I have reviewed many reports during my time at BRE, I can't really recall specific examples, but obviously I have reviewed their written work. Yes.
Right. And on what sort of occasions would you have cause to read their written work?
It might be an output from a project. I would have obviously reviewed any written work that they produced in terms of monthly reports, in terms of the business. And that would have been on a sort of regular basis.
Now, Chiara Holland, she says in her statement, paragraph 8 of her statement, that she joined the BRE on the 1st of October 2012 as a consultant in the fire investigation team, or the fire investigation business group, I think, and worked on projects in the wider fire safety group as the need arose. Can you confirm that?
I can't confirm the date, but I'll take that as read.
Right. She also says, just taking it shortly, that you were the contract manager, project director and QA for all fire safety related government research projects and ultimately approved bids and proposals and also approved many fire research reports. Is that correct? As a general description of your role?
Yes, I mean, I didn't approve all research reports, but I probably did approve a number, and also I probably didn't approve every single proposal, because obviously if I wasn't there when the deadline had to be met.
Now she says in the same place, it's paragraph 13 of her statement on page 4, just for the reference, it's BRE 3043829, that she understood that the fire investigation team ultimately reported to you, Dr. Smith. Is that correct?
Well, insofar as I was the managing director at that time, that's when she's talking about, is it? Yes?
Well, from 1st of October 2012.
Yes, I from 2012, yes, I would have been the director with responsibility at that time, yes.
Were you a director with responsibility for the fire investigation team before October 2012?
I don't think I was.
Right.
So I reported into another member of the management team at BRE.
Now you can see that she refers to, in the third line, or second and third line, to the Fire Sciences and Building Products division.
Yes.
Who else, or what other teams sat within that team or division?
So there was the Fire Safety Business Group. That was headed up by Steve Manchester. There was the Passive Fire Group, which was headed up at that time by Steve and Howard. There was the Suppression Business Group that was headed up by Dr Sarah Colwell.
And did that sit within the wider fire safety group, or?
No,
was it?
there was a Fire Safety Business Group.
Right, and that's Steve Manchester.
Yes.
I see.
Yes.
So those three, as it were, subgroups sat within the Fire Sciences and Building Products team. I follow.
Yes.
Now, Martin Shipp, in his statement to the inquiry, paragraph 79, page 15, says, and I'm summarising, that from 2007 or 2008, in fact, we can look at it on the screen, this is paragraph 79,
yes.
BRE 3047594, he says this: from as I recollect, around 2007 or 2008 until her retirement in 2021, Debbie Smith has been responsible for signing off any papers that are published, i.e. put into the public domain. This includes papers resulting from research for government, which will be signed off once the government client has had an opportunity to comment on the draft. Is he correct in what he says there?
It's around 2008. I think that is pretty much correct. What I would say is that any paper that was published externally also went through a final read by others within the BRE group, so that they were aware of what was going into the public domain. And for example, that might and would tend to include the managing director of the company, of the BRE,
Right.
of BRE Global.
Can I just explore that a little bit?
Yes.
You say we went through a final read by others within the BRE group. Does that mean that even though you were signing something off, there was somebody either equal to you as a peer or senior to you, supervising you, who would review your sign-off?
Yes, to some extent.
To what extent?
Well, I mean, to the extent that they read them. I mean, they didn't all read all of them, but they saw them all so that they were aware of what was coming out and what was going to the public domain.
So can we leave that like this then? That when you signed off, sometimes somebody would peer review your sign-off or supervise it, and sometimes they wouldn't.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, now, we'll look at some sections now from Tom Lennon's witness statement for the inquiry. He was at the BRE from 1983. Well, he was principal consultant in the fire safety group, wasn't he?
Well, he is now, yes.
He is now?
Yes.
Do you know when he started?
What, as principal consultant?
Yes.
Or no, I don't know when he was promoted to.
Okay, well, he says that he was principal consultant in the fire safety group, and that you were the key account manager for probably all the government research projects that he worked on within the fire safety group of BRE. Do you agree with that? That's what he said.
That I took over that role in 2008 when Peter Field retired from BRE.
Yes. And what is a key account manager?
Well, it was somebody that was defined within the proposal that went to the customer, and basically the key account manager's role is to act, or was to act, as the key point of contact for any communications, etc., any problems that might be occurring with projects. That they were the person that the department had a point of contact.
I see it.
Yeah.
Now, he also says, does Tom Lennon, that you ran the BRE Trust Research Programme. Very briefly, if you can, what was that?
Okay, so I mean, I don't think I quite agree with that. I didn't run the BRE Trust research programme, but the BRE Trust received monies from any profits that BRE made were gift aided to the BRE Trust, and then they spent that money on a variety of different activities for the public good. And that included research, it included some publications, it also included funding PhDs at partner universities where we'd set up university centres. I think at one point there were 5 of those in the UK. And so it was all about sort of education, training and improving sort of the knowledge base. And the BRE Trust tended to fund research, and they had a research committee that were not employees of BRE that would review all of the proposals that were submitted to them, and then they would decide their priority and which ones they wanted to fund. So, you know, my involvement and other colleagues within BRE was to basically facilitate the proposals from the teams, to encourage them to put in bids. But I didn't, you know, I wasn't the decision maker in terms of whether they got funded or not.
And is it right that the BRE Trust's funding came from the profits generated by the business side of BRE?
Yes.
Solely?
That's
or
my
were there,
understanding anyway.
Right. Were there any other sources of funding to the BRE Trust?
I don't know.
You don't know? And was the BRE business side involved at all in initiating and devising the research projects carried out by the BRE Trust?
Well, insofar as we would bid in and put the proposals to the BRE Trust, but, you know, every year far more proposals went in than there was money available to fund. So it was, you know, it really was the research committee's decision to review all of those and to decide where they wanted to place their money, basically.
Can I just then come back to your career? Paragraph 11 of your own statement, please, page 3. you say that in June 2010 you were awarded an OBE for services to fire safety. That's right, is it?
Yes, it is.
And you go on in your statement at paragraphs 14 on page 3 through to 19. We don't need to read it all out, but to give an overview of your various appointments, fellowships and memberships of BSI committees, and some aspects of the research work that you've carried out or been involved in, and your published works over the period of your career. Just in summary, would you accept this characterisation that you are a renowned expert in the United Kingdom in the field of fire safety? You don't have to be modest.
Well, I think I'm seen as a fire expert. I mean, it's for others to judge if you're renowned or not, isn't it?
Let's see if I can get your reaction to something. Can we go, please, to META 401285? Now, it'll be obvious to you, looking at the screen at the bottom, what it is I'm asking you to look at and why. It's an email of the 16th of June 2017, so 2 days after the Grenfell Tower fire, sent by Pavlos Vatavalis of European Aluminium. And in the second paragraph of his email, he says, Debbie Smith is the god, capital letters, of fire in the UK, and one of the few in Europe. Definitely her opinion is more than important. Now, are you aware, or were you aware at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire, that this is how you were, at least in some quarters, regarded in the industry?
No, and I don't recall ever meeting Pavlos Vatavalis.
No.
So,
I mean, you may not claim divinity for yourself, but were you ever aware that you were revered to this extent?
No.
Now let's turn then to some history. 1997, as you, I think, confirmed, the BRE was privatised, wasn't it?
Yes.
In the dying days of the Major administration.
Correct, yes.
What impact did the privatisation have on your role?
On my role? So pre-privatisation, a lot of the work that I did was funded through something called the Directors Programme, which was very focused on more pre-normative type research, that is, more fundamental type research, perhaps is a better description to make it easier to understand, rather than sort of the near market type research. For direct application. So all of the work that was done on the development and the validation of computational methods, the application of computational fluid dynamics to fires, and the application of other types of modelling approaches that was pioneered at the Fire Research Station, was done and funded through that mechanism, if you like. And when I joined, I mean, part of my role was to develop data from experimental programs that could be used to validate the computational models that were being developed, and basically to help then provide the data that would develop the sub-models that needed to go in it, because using a fundamental fluid dynamics model, you can't model everything from first principles.
It's quite a specific and scientific answer to my question. I'm looking for something a little bit more economic. As a matter of common sense, is it right that privatisation meant that the BRE then had to stand on its own 2 feet financially?
Oh, yes. Yeah, of course. Yes.
And so, therefore, the source of government funds was cut off and could only be accessed by bidding for contracts?
Yes. I mean, the first 5 years after privatisation, and I don't know the full details of it, but certainly as part of the privatisation deal, if you like, with government, there was a guaranteed minimum level of funding to BRE under the first framework. And, I mean, it meant they could spend more than that, but it meant they wouldn't go below a baseline minimum. But that only existed for the first 5 years.
Yeah. So it expired in, what, 2002?
Yes, it would have done.
And after that, you then had to make your way in the world financially.
Yes, and any government funding had to be bid for.
Yeah. Can we look at Martin Shipp's second statement to the inquiry? At BRE 3047594, please, page 12, paragraph 69, he says this: publications were, in my view, also affected by privatisation. Prior to privatisation, essentially all of the fire safety research we carried out was for government, and most was quite quickly put into the public domain. And he gives an example. As I discussed further below, fire investigation reports considered to be supporting the development of government policy were mostly not published. Following privatisation, the programme of work for government diminished, and also the process of putting findings into the public domain became more cumbersome since BRE's legal interests had to be protected. The research that was commissioned by non-government organisations, i.e. the private sector, was for their own commercial purposes and seldom entered the public domain. Does what Mr. Shipp say there accord with your own experience?
Largely. I'm not quite sure what he means by it became more cumbersome. I mean, obviously, pre-privatisation, then Her Majesty's Stationery Office would have been the main route for publishing reports, etc. And obviously, once we were privatised, that was no longer available. And there was a period of time where outputs from government work, I don't think the department at that time, which I think it was DETR, quite knew how to deal with them.
Was it your own experience that the BRE's fire safety research was made publicly available less quickly and according to a more cumbersome process than before privatisation?
I suppose that there is an element of truth in that, yes, in the sense that prior to privatisation, I suppose there was more freedom to put research into journals and peer-reviewed journals and so on without the oversight. But clearly, once we were privatised, then everything that was going to be put into the public domain had to go through the department. So there was another tier of checking, if you like.
Yes, I see. And was that partly, at least, because the BRE's legal interests had to be protected?
I don't know what he means by that.
Was it also your experience that after privatisation, the programme of fire safety research work for the government diminished?
Yes.
Yeah. And if we go on to page 13 of his statement, please, paragraph 71, he says, in my opinion, privatisation has also impacted upon the investigation of real fires programme. Beyond the reduction in financial value, the project did and does depend very much on the cooperation and goodwill of fire and rescue service officers who notify us about significant fires, arrange access for us, and usually accompany us. Before privatisation, we as civil servants were, I believe, seen by fire and rescue services as comrades in public service with a public service ethic, and we felt the same. After privatisation, we were, in my view, often perceived as just another commercial business. BRE staff who thought they were working for the public good and who, before privatisation, necessarily did not need to consider whether projects were profitable, now we're encouraged by the new owners of BRE to always consider whether a project would be profitable or at least cover its costs in order that BRE could continue to operate as a viable organisation. Now, we will come back in due course, Dr. Smith, to some detailed questions about the investigation of Real Fires project, but in general terms, does what Martin Shipp says there accord with your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I had no direct experience of dealing with the fire and rescue service officers that he refers to. So, I mean, obviously, I
you can't comment on that?
Yeah, I concede on that point to what his recollection is and what his understanding is on that.
And in your experience, did the BRE investigate fewer fires as a consequence of privatisation?
If the financial value of the contract that was let had reduced, then inevitably, yes, they would have.
Does that mean that the less money that was available to investigate, the less you would investigate?
Yes, of course, yes.
Now, we'll look at a section next of Peter Field's statement. Just briefly on Peter Field, is it right? He was senior to you and was at the BRE from 1965 to 2007. Those are the dates he gives.
Yeah, well, he was senior to me. I don't know when he joined.
Right.
I mean, obviously, that was way before I joined. So.
Indeed. But I think you can confirm at least this much, that he was Director of Fire and Security in the years 2004 to 2007.
Yes.
Yes. Now, let's look at his statement, please. BRE 3043710, page 10, page 11, paragraph 10, please. He says this. It's paragraph 54. I think we probably need the foot of page 10, actually. Just go to the bottom of page 10. Yes. He says... there, I have some recollection that immediately prior to or during the 5-year guarantee, the ODPM/DETR, then DOE official responsible for making the case for BRE's funding for work in support of fire safety research and ADB, I believe this was Anthony Ferguson, was not as successful in obtaining the level of funding that had previously been provided. In particular, I seem to recall that the funding for fire research and investigations in support of ADB was at some stage around £3 to £4 million per financial year, and over maybe 4 to 5 years, this reduced to around £1.5 to £2 million. Having said that, I do not have a firm recollection of the exact dates or amounts, and as noted above, I do not recall being made aware of precisely how funding operated under the terms of the 5-year guarantee, including whether funding was always intended to taper off in successive years. However, I do know that the funding for this work did reduce significantly. Now, again, would you agree with what he says there?
Insofar as I am aware, yes, because I, like Peter, did not have any direct involvement with the 5-year guarantee. I mean, that was dealt with at BRE top management level.
In as few a sentences as you can, what did the 5-year guarantee involve?
Okay, so that's what I spoke about earlier.
That's what you told us about
Yes,
before, right?
yeah.
Were you aware at any time during the 5-year period that the official who was responsible for making the case for BRE's funding for work in support of the fire safety research and ADB, Mr. Ferguson, was not as successful in obtaining the level of funding that had previously been provided?
I don't know.
You don't know? You don't know why, do you?
No, I don't.
Right. Do the figures that are referred to here by Mr. Field sound familiar to you, at least?
They
At least
sound
a ballpark?
approximately
Right.
right. They don't sound way off.
Right. And was it the case that funding went to other organisations, or was it the case that the funding for the research and investigations in support of approved document B, particularly, was reduced?
I wouldn't know that.
You don't know?
No.
And was less work in support of fire safety research and approved document B carried out across the board, do you know, post-privatisation?
I think it was, yes.
Yes. If you look at page 11, paragraph 55, he says this, Mr. Field, I recall that the reduction in funding from government had 3 key implications for BRE. A, the need to seek a larger proportion of its income from commercial sources in order to fully utilise staff whose capabilities had been developed and maintained and whose costs had previously been covered by government funding. B, more limited financial resources, which led to the loss of some staff and expertise. C, a particular impact on the resources available to conduct BRE's so-called blue skies research, which was often undertaken to preempt future issues in terms of fire safety. These activities could not easily be funded from commercial sources. Do you agree with what Mr. Field says there in terms of the implications of a reduction in funding from central government?
Yes, I do.
You do. And were those matters ever matters that you yourself discussed with Peter Field?
I'm sure we must have discussed them at some point.
And what about Martin Shipp? Did you discuss those matters with him?
Yes, I mean, I think that these were issues that were clear to people, and you know, clearly with the loss of staff and expertise, etc.
Yeah.
You know, it was visible.
Right.
It was palpably visible. So.
And what was the impact of the BRE being compelled to seek a larger proportion of its income from commercial sources?
It did change the type of work that we could undertake.
Can you?
Because, as Peter has said there, you know, commercial bodies and organisations, companies, etc., were never willing to fund like pre-normative fundamental type research work as a rule. I mean, they were only interested in any research work that was quite focused, and made it, so it made it very much more difficult. The only way that you could do some of this work was through project types like the Partners in Innovation and the Partners in Technology programs, where they were part funded. Because I think, as either Martin or Peter has said there, I don't know if it was Peter, that that there was a reluctance from commercial organisations to make the findings of their research generally available.
Is what you're
Sorry,
saying...
Can I just ask this? When you were funded by the government, who was responsible for the direction of what one might call your blue skies research?
It was still held, the responsibility for that, in the department, in the government department. And
So
again, bids would have to be made to the government department and the officials, whoever they were there, to consider if they wanted to fund that or not.
So basically, people in the BRE proposed research projects
Yes,
to the government for consideration
yes,
and funding.
yes.
And presumably, even after privatisation, there was no reason in principle. Well, I mean, you could suggest to government that here was a problem that needed some,
Yes, and
some
indeed,
research. Would they
Okay.
like to fund it?
yes, and indeed we did.
Right.
That continued for some time,
Yeah.
where ideas for projects were put forward
Yeah.
to government to consider whether they wanted to fund them or not.
I mean, it suggests to me that the real problem was not necessarily privatisation as such, but the government's willingness to fund what you call blue skies research.
Yeah, well, Peter calls it that. Yeah.
Well.
Yes, yeah.
And
Yes.
That's really the problem, wasn't it?
Yes, I think so, yes.
All right. Thank you. Sorry.
And the obverse of that is that commercial entities, manufacturers, for example, were not interested in experiments for the benefit of a better understanding of fire safety in the public interest, but for the better to sell their products.
Absolutely, yes. And that's not just manufacturers, of course, that could be other types of commercial entities.
Can you give us an example?
It might be work that was being done for a commercial retailer, for example.
Yes, I see. Now, was there a time when there was research that you can recall that you or your team wanted to carry out, or perhaps to explore fundamental issues or to preempt problems in terms of fire safety, but were unable to do so because of a lack of funding?
That's been a constant line through the path that we've been on.
Right.
It's I say all bids for research into funding opportunities are competitive, and invariably some get funded and some don't.
Can we then look at Peter Field's statement, please, at the next page, page 12, paragraph 56. Page 11, paragraph 56, and he says this. There were further major changes once the Fire Safety Framework Agreement was entered into in 2003, following the end of the 5-year guarantee. The government began to tender competitively for the research that it required in support of the building regulations. Subsequent management of contracts awarded was handled by intermediary contract managers, AEA Technology. I remember feeling that privatisation had now diminished further the close working relationship BRE previously had with policy officers within government who were responsible for commissioning research in support of the building regulations. I felt the involvement of AEA Technology as research management contractors added an unnecessary and costly middleman into an arrangement that had been working effectively for decades, which did not add value for money and which introduced a new level of bureaucracy. Now, Did you yourself consider also that through competitive tendering and the introduction of this middleman, AEA technology, as contract manager, the BRE and the Building Regulations Policy Officer's close working relationship was undermined or further diminished?
I mean, obviously, I didn't have the same experience that Peter did, having been there for much longer and knowing how it worked through the years. But certainly, yes, there was a change in the way that we interacted.
Yeah, you wouldn't disagree with anything he said there, or would you?
Well, I don't know whether it was an unnecessary and costly middleman. I mean, it's not for me to comment on that.
No. Did you consider that there was some benefit to fire safety research by the addition of AEA technology as management contractors?
I mean, the only, I suppose, advantage that came with that was they produced basically a portal where all of the documents and so on were all archived. So all of the outputs and reports and so on were archived on their database. And in a way, that made report approval and the management a little bit easier.
In relation to the fire safety framework, do you know when that came to an end?
So there were 3 fire safety frameworks. There was the initial 5-year guarantee to BRE on privatisation. There was then a second framework that was competitively tendered in 2003. That then ran, I think, till 2007, 2008. And then there was a third framework, again, that was competitively tendered. But each time they kind of evolved and they were slightly different from the previous one.
And the third framework, when did that end?
I think that must have ended, I think it was a 4-year framework, so it probably ended around 2011.
And what happened after that?
Everything just became competitively tendered.
Right.
Any projects were procured through the government procurement portal.
I see. So you had no safety net, effectively.
Well, we didn't have a safety net after 2002.
Right. But you didn't have as it were, an offtake agreement, a framework agreement under which you could continue to work.
No, and I mean, as I say, the frameworks evolved. So the final framework, there were a number of contractors that were appointed to that framework. And then when a project came up, then all of those people that were appointed to the framework were invited to bid for it. So it was competitive and, again, competitive. You see what I mean?
You were fire safety manager. I think you were the fire safety framework manager at times.
Yes.
What can you just tell us when?
So I took over, I say, when Peter Field retired, which was approximately the end of the second framework. So I was the fire safety manager through the third framework.
Now, I'm going to turn to a new topic. Mr. Chairman, it's 5 to 1. I can make a decent start on it, but I won't finish it. Yeah,
Right.
so it is ADB and some definitions. I want to ask you about some particular definitions and fire classifications. First, I want to ask you about the background to National Class Naught. Now, we know, I think, and correct us if we're wrong about this, but the classification is achieved by combining particular results from 2 British standard tests, BS 476 Part 6 and BS 476 Part 7.
Correct.
Looking at 7, first of all, that's a surface spread of flame test, isn't it?
Correct.
And what is your understanding of the origins of that test?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I mean, it way predates my involvement with joining the fire research station even.
Right.
But BRE and the fire research station, to my knowledge, were not involved heavily at the time that I joined anyway, up until 2000 in fire testing to BS 476 Part 6 and 7. We didn't have any spread of flame apparatus or a fire propagation test.
And would you, or do you know, if you don't know, tell me, but from the 1940s, in fact, it was a method of testing flame spread within corridors inside buildings.
Yes, it was for lining materials. I know that, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Internal lining materials.
Internal lining
Yes.
materials, yes, thank you. And do you agree that there have been no fundamental changes to the Part 7 test since it was initially developed at some point during World War II?
That may be true. I can't really comment on that. I've not done a historic review of it back to 1940. So
no. Do you know that the reference scenario, if I can put it that way, for that test is an internal fire?
yes.
Yeah. Turning then to Part 6, that tests fire propagation, doesn't it?
Yes.
And how would you define fire propagation in very, very simple terms?
Yeah, I mean, basically what the test is doing is it's measuring temperature increase when exposed to an internal radiant panel within the box that the sample is exposed in. So essentially, you're measuring the contribution from that product, that material that you've got mounted in the box, to that imposed radiant heat flux, and the gas flame along the bottom as well.
Yes. And do you have any understanding about the origins of that test?
No, again, I don't.
And again, do you agree that it was, at least this much, developed and intended to test fire propagation within a compartment?
That's my understanding, yes.
So both of those tests have internal fire as their reference scenario.
That's my understanding, yes.
Neither was designed or intended for an external cladding fire scenario.
Correct.
Did there ever come a time during your long career at the BRE when you considered whether Class 0 as a classification, based as it was on two tests from the 1940s and perhaps 50s, was any longer an appropriate or safe test in the light of modern materials and modern methods of construction being used in external wall build-ups as they were evolving?
Well, my understanding to the background of this, but obviously it wasn't at the time because I wasn't working in that area, but my understanding is that it was around 1988 when concerns were first raised around that, which led to some large-scale experimental work being done, which were reported in BR 135. And from there on in, there was a growing body of evidence that showed that, a larger scale scenario-based test, more relevant to external fire performance, was being pursued.
It's not. Yes, and we may come to that, but just focusing on my question, did you ever ask yourself at any time during your career at the BRE, I wonder whether Class 0 really is an appropriate classification for reaction to fire for an external wall panel, given its origins and its reference?
Not in that sense, because other things were going on with a view to one which would have made the Class O classification and all of the other national classes redundant anyway. And that's the European developments within the publication of the European norms. And secondly, the development of the large-scale test that was going on for a number of years.
Well,
which ultimately became BS 8414, of course.
And we will come to European norms after the break. Is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think it is. Well, I think, Dr. Smith, it's time we stop for some lunch. I know you've only just getting into your stride, but if we don't stop now, we might never get to lunch.
Okay.
So we'll do that. We'll resume, please, at 2 o'clock. And as you started giving your evidence, I'm going to say to you, as I have to everybody else, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're out of the room.
Okay.
All right? Thank you very much.
Thank
Would
you.
you like to go to the usher then,
Yeah,
please?
thank you.
Thank you. 2 o'clock, Mr. Bennett. Thank you.